The signal came in at 4 minutes past the third watch cycle, and it was nothing. That was the official red. Broken carrier wave, fractured compression, the kind of static you get off a decommissioned depot that's been sitting cold and unpowered on the outer edge of the drift. 11 years, my duty officer called it a ghost ping and told me to log it and move on. I logged it. I didn't move on. There was a 6-digit authentication fragment buried in the noise. I almost missed it. I'd have missed it entirely if I hadn't spent 3 years before my fleet transfer doing signal interpretation work on VARI border traffic. Learning the way their comm encoding collapsed under pressure, the way their authentication strings degraded in sequence when the sender was transmitting from a device that wasn't theirs, a device with a cracked power cell, a device being held in a hand that was shaking. I knew what a VARI emergency signal looked like when it was being sent by someone who had almost nothing left. I filed a detour request. Command denied it in under a minute. Go static, they said again. Don't chase noise, I requested again. They denied it faster. I diverted anyway. That's the part I don't tell most people. I've spent 10 years in uniform, and I've followed orders through things that kept me awake for weeks. Afterward, and the one time I went off-route without authorization, it was for 6 digits of broken static from a depot that wasn't on any active registry. I don't have a clean explanation for that. I looked at those 6 digits on my screen, and something in me understood that there was a person on the other end of them, and I was not willing to let that person wait out the time it would take me to file a third request and receive a third denial. The Kelvas depot was cold enough to rime. That's the word for it. Rime, a thin frost over every surface. The kind that tells you the heating system hasn't cycled in a long time, and neither has the air. Came in through the service dock because the main bay seals had corroded shut, and I moved slow, because slow is quiet and quiet is alive. There were 3 of them. Contractors. The kind that don't carry insignia, that rent themselves by the job and ask no questions about the cargo. 2 were sitting at a portable heat station in what used to be the depot's processing room, eating from sealed rations, talking about something I had no interest in. The 3rd was near the back. I could hear him before I saw him. He was the one standing closest to the cell. She was in the cell. I had a second to take it in before I had to decide anything. The cell was a standard containment unit, the old Kelvast modular kind, 3 walls of composite fencing and 1 locked gate. She was seated on the floor with her back against the far wall, wrists secured to a ring bolt with restraint cord, and she was looking directly at me. Not at the doorway, at me, like she had heard me moving and had been watching the entrance for the last several minutes. She was composed. That was the first thing I registered. She was cold, clearly in pain. Her left arm held at an angle that said fracture. Nothing catastrophic, but nothing minor. And she was looking at me with the focused calm of someone who had decided that panic was a resource to afford. Her skin was dark copper, her hair silver and close-cropped, and her eyes were amber. In the dim light they caught what little there was and held it. She wore what was left of formal attire. A high-collared robe in dark blue with silver edgework, now torn at the shoulder and dirty at the hem. There was a raw mark on her collarbone, where something had been removed. Her rank seal I found out later. A biometric identifier every VARI of rank wears from the age of majority. Removing it requires a specific tool and a specific act of deliberate humiliation. I thought about the 2 men at the heat station. I thought about the 3rd man 3 meters away from me. I stepped into the processing room and I said, in my most unhurried voice, that I was the advance check from the purchasing party, and that I needed 5 minutes alone with the asset to verify condition before the principal arrived. It was a lie built entirely out of the words I had heard contractors use when I worked border traffic. It shouldn't have worked. Looking back, it had no business working. But the man closest to the cell was the kind of contractor who does not get paid to ask questions. And he looked at me, my uniform, my size, my complete lack of urgency, and he stepped back and told the others to give me the room. They gave me the room. I crossed to the cell in 4 steps. I crouched down so I was level with her, and I kept my voice low and I said, I intercepted your signal. I'm going to get you out. I need you to tell me how much you can move. She studied me for a moment. She had the particular stillness of someone who has learned that reaction is information. and information given freely is a cost. Then she said, quietly, my left arm is cracked below the elbow. My legs are functional. I have not slept in 2 cycles and I have not eaten, but I am capable of movement if the distance is not extreme. I said, the distance is not extreme. She said, and the 3 men? I said, shh, I'm working on that. She almost smiled. It was a very small thing. It was the kind of almost smile that carries weight, precisely because the person making it doesn't do it easily. I stood up and I went back out, and I started talking. I spent the next 2 hours being someone I wasn't. I invented a buyer, invented a delivery schedule, invented a dispute about the original terms that needed walking through line by line, kept them occupied and talking, and kept myself between them and the cell without being obvious about it. When one got impatient and wanted to check on the asset, I told him the principal had been very specific about conditioning protocols, and he'd have a liability issue if he interfered. I said liability the way officers say it, like it's a fixed object in the room that no one wants to touch. He didn't go. Through all of this, when I had a sight line to the cell, she was watching me, not with hope exactly, with attention, the careful, precise attention of someone recalibrating their understanding of a situation in real time. At one point, I caught her eyes, and she gave me the smallest nod. I don't know what it meant in Veyri protocol. In the context of that room, it meant that she was ready. I caused a distraction. That's all I'll say. Because some of it I'm not proud of, and some of it worked only because I got lucky. The specifics matter less than the result. All 3 contractors were focused elsewhere long enough. The restraint cord was a simple compression lock. I cut it with the tool I carry on my left hip, and she stood in one motion, favoring her left arm, and her face did not change. My hand under her good elbow, not holding her up, just present, and we moved. The service dock was 40 meters and 1 turn. She matched my pace exactly. She did not ask me again about the 3 men. She had decided, I think, that I had accounted for them. And she was right. Outside was the drift's ambient cold, which is different from the depot's rime. Thinner, cleaner, cold of open space kept at bay by a generation ship's hull running at minimum heat. The dock lights were amber and low. I stopped, and she stopped beside me. I took off my outer jacket and held it out to her. Not draped over her shoulders, not placed. I held it out, and she took it herself, which mattered. She pulled it on over the ruined robe, and it was too large across the shoulders and too long in the sleeves. And she looked down at it for a second, and then looked back up at me. She said, "You came alone." I said, "Yes." She said, "Your command authorized this?" I said, "Not exactly." Something passed across her face. Not surprise, something quieter. She stood there in the amber light with my jacket around her, and her amber eyes steady, and she said, "What is your name?" I told her. She said it back to me. "Ren Calloway." Slowly, the way you say something you're committing to memory. That was all. We walked to my ship. I called ahead for a medical station. She sat in the co-pilot's chair, and she did not sleep, and I did not ask her to, and neither of us said much for the first hour of the transit. Somewhere in the second hour she said, quietly, and without looking at me, that in Veyri custom, a life debt has a formal structure and a formal answer, and she would be returning in the proper way to resolve it. I said there was no debt. She said there was, and that she would be returning. I didn't argue. You learn after a while, when an argument is already finished. I flew, and she watched the starfield, and the depot fell away behind us into the dark of the drift, and it was enough. It was exactly enough.